Greetings, friends and families. I'm Dr. Ashley Bennett, co-leader of Accept, and on behalf of Accept, Admissions Community Cultivating Equity and Peace today, I'm excited to welcome you all to the second series of Being Black in College. To provide a bit of context, I want to share how we got here. After the deaths of Atiana Jefferson, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and too many more to name, we wanted to offer something specific to Black students. Additionally, we recently witnessed Breonna Taylor's killers walk away with no consequences for her murder. It's a tale as old as time. So many people are looking for something to believe in, myself included. I ask that everyone who is with us this evening think about college as an opportunity to earn a seat at the table. While a degree in college does not validate any of us, as we are already enough, the panelists wholeheartedly believe that college catapulted us to positions we would not be able to occupy otherwise. We want that for you, your children, and your students. With that, I ask that tonight's panelists introduce themselves by sharing who they are, where they work, and why today's topic, historically Black colleges and universities, speaks to them. So, Jamon, would you like to get us started?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jawan Wallace. I am one of the deans of college counseling at Marlborough School in Los Angeles, California. I have been working there probably for about 4 years. My whole career has been primarily in college admissions and college counseling. But I was super eager and excited to participate in tonight's panel because I am a proud graduate of a historically Black college and university, Hampton University, located in Hampton, Virginia. And, you know, for me, Hampton really changed kind of my life. You know, I think about my college experience and I would not have it any other way. I grew up in predominantly white areas and went to schools with peers that didn't look like myself. And so I knew pretty early on, probably in like middle school, that I wanted to go to a historically Black college and university because I was looking for that sense of belonging. And so also during that time, you all probably don't remember a TV show called A Different World, but it was basically a spinoff of The Cosby Show, and it was about a historically Black college, a fictitious historically Black college. And I love the show, and that got me super interested and excited about attending college and specifically in HBCU. And then I remember in high school, I actually had the opportunity to start visiting colleges, and I went to visit Hampton. I was sold. It immediately felt like family. I was welcomed with open arms, and it was definitely the best 4 years of my life, and you know, absolutely prepared me for my future. I went on to pursue a master's degree and a PhD in higher education, and I wouldn't be where I am today without my HBCU. So happy to be here.
Dr. Tennille.
Hi, hello. I'm Dr. Tennille Brownrigg. I'm currently a professor working in the Department of Social Work, Psychology, and Counseling on the Hill at Alabama A&M University. I am a 2001 graduate of the Tuskegee University and a member of the Gamma Tau chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Yes, ma'am. Um, this particular topic is extremely important to me because as an educator, I've been in education for almost 20 years, working as a high school teacher and then as a school counselor for the past 13 years. And I feel as though it is necessary for students to know that they have an option. The option to go somewhere for 4 years, they can absolutely engage in education in a meaningful way and not be concerned with the toils of color. And they can go to a school that is going to celebrate them, going to celebrate the rich history of who we are as Black people and African Americans, and an opportunity, comrades and colleagues with groups of students who have the same interests and the same experiences in many ways that they have, and create a network that is long lasting and going to last them for the rest of their lives. I can honestly say my Tuskegee experience absolutely changed the dynamics of who I am as a person and who I am as a productive citizen in society. So I think that this topic is extremely important, and it's thank you all for inviting me to be here today, because I'm really excited to join you all.
Thank you. And gentlemen, would you like to go?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jamon Pulliam. I currently serve as an Associate Director of College Counseling at Viewpoint School, also in Southern California in the greater Los Angeles area. Prior to that, I was also at another school in the Bay Area. And before that, I worked in college admissions, similar to Jawan, at Morehouse College, which is an all-male, historically Black college in Atlanta, Georgia. And I would say I'm here today because I'm all things HBCUs. I also went to Tuskegee University, and just luck of the draw, similar to Jawan, I went to a predominantly white high school. And I think at some point it just kind of clicked for me that I wanted to be in a different type of space. And I had known about HBCUs, but put it off. A lot of my friends were looking at large state schools in Michigan. And I was like, I want to go to an HBCU. And a Morehouse rep came to my high school, and it just kind of clicked for me. And my mom and I, we went to tour schools. We were on our way to Alabama State, which in Tuskegee world, we don't talk about Alabama State. We were on our way to Alabama State, and my mom saw the sign for Tuskegee, and she said, well, do you want to stop here? And I was like, I guess, whatever. And we stopped, and the history of that school, the camaraderie that I saw on the campus, just to show up completely unannounced, no other school compared to it. And to walk a space where all the students looked like me, and they were hanging out on the yard, and they were catching up with one another. Like, it was just an experience that I had never seen before. So for me and everything that I do, I know that I am where I am in my life because of Tuskegee, because of my Tuskegee experience, and because of the things that I learned there in the classroom, but more importantly, outside of the classroom, in clubs and organizations and Greek life and different aspects of that experience. So I preach it to my students always. And again, as an option, it's not for everybody, don't get me wrong, but I think it's important that students know that they are out there and that they are good experiences. So that's why I'm here tonight.
And good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Destin. I am currently owner of a real estate firm in Houston, Texas, but I was a principal at a high school for 17 years. Not a principal for 17 years, but administration for 17 years. And had a vast educational history with young students in the same aspect. I went to Prairie View A&M University, where I also was a member of the football team. And so I got a kind of different perspective. I'm from a neighborhood where, everybody's the same color. And it was very intriguing to go to a college university where I kind of saw the same thing. So a little bit, let me say this. I'm from a neighborhood where everybody was the same color, but on the other side of the tracks, it was another color. So in saying that, my school was predominantly, I would say 70% Anglo and the other 30% African-American. So experiencing that and then going to an HBCU that my uncle also attended was amazing as a kid. So I always wanted to play football for HBCU, and that dream did come true for me. But it did a lot of other things. The HBCU really took me to another level of life, you know what I'm saying? So that I don't feel like I could have gotten at any other university.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing with us so far. So we'll go ahead and get started on the HBCUs. For those of us who joined us this evening, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping things. So the chat feature will be open to you for the entirety of the webinar. We ask if you have any pointed questions that you use the Q&A feature so I can make sure I see all of them and they don't get lost in the chat. However, I will be scanning the chat as well. And as resources are shared, I will do my best to add them to our chat, and the other panelists will join me in doing that. So we will just go ahead and get started. I'm excited to hear from our esteemed panelists today, and I know you are too. So I will start with a question about just the history of HBCUs. And so Dr. Wallace, if you would just share a brief history the inception of HBCUs, how they came to be, how they benefit Black folks and others. And so let's just hear about that so we can get a good framework for our conversation today.
Absolutely. So I'll definitely preface this by saying I am not going to do this history justice because I think HBCUs have such a rich history, such a rich tradition, and a complicated past and how they came to be. And so I'm going to go over this kind of briefly, but I definitely encourage you all to do some research and find out more about these wonderful institutions. So I think starting out with just kind of a definition. So historically Black colleges and universities are defined by the Higher Education Act in 1965 as any historically Black college or university that was established prior to 1964, whose principal mission was and is the education of Black Americans, and that is accredited by a nationally recognized accrediting agency or association determined by the Secretary of Education. HBCUs were established to serve the educational needs of Black Americans prior to the time of their establishment. And for many years afterwards, Blacks were generally denied admission to colleges and universities across the country. And as a result, HBCUs became kind of the principal means for providing post-secondary education for Blacks. If we go kind of prior to the Civil War, there were a lot of provisions that prohibited the education of Black folks. And so you saw kind of the first HBCUs developed kind of more in the North, Midwest. So first higher education institution for Blacks was Cheyney University in Pennsylvania. And at that time, it wasn't even called Cheyney, followed by Lincoln, which is also in Pennsylvania, and then Wilberforce, which is in Ohio. And a major part of their mission in the early years was really to provide elementary and secondary schooling for students that didn't have a previous education, in the hope that, you know, Blacks would go on to become teachers or tradesmen, clergy, things of that nature. And many were founded by a lot of the churches at the time. It wasn't until like the early 1900s that HBCUs started to offer courses and programs at the post-secondary level. And then if we move to kind of following the Civil War, public support for higher education was reflected in the Second Morrill Act. And this act basically specified that states that used federal education funds had to provide education to Black students. Either they could open their doors, predominantly white institutions could open their doors to Black students, or they could create institutions specifically for Black students. And so rather than integrating, many of these predominantly white institutions chose to create these institutions specifically for Black students. And that's why you see so many historically Black colleges in the South primarily. So between 1861 and 1900, there were more than 90 historically Black colleges and universities. And today we probably have a little over 100. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, Black colleges thrived. So they were attracting many of our foremost like Black thinkers and leaders. And many of these schools started to shift their focus. So instead of being so focused on trades, they started to really promote scholarship. And so then you kind of move into the late 50s, you start to see much more legislation that deemed segregation of schools was unconstitutional. And so you see many more predominantly white institutions start to open up their doors. The idea of affirmative action comes into play. And so more and more students are given opportunities to attend predominantly white institutions. But even with that shift, today, despite being underfunded, despite not necessarily having the same resources as many predominantly white institutions, HBCUs produce some of our top leaders and thinkers. Even though Black schools only represent 3% of US colleges and universities, 40% of members of Congress that are Black came from HBCUs. 40% of Black engineers came from HBCUs. 50% of professors at non-HBCUs came from HBCUs. 50% of our Black lawyers, HBCUs. 80% of our Black judges are from HBCUs. 8 of the top 10 institutions that produce Black undergrads who went on to earn science and engineering doctorates came from HBCUs. So clearly HBCUs are still very relevant. And so that's just kind of like a brief kind of history. But like I said, I definitely encourage you all to really dig in and learn the history of these institutions.
I would ask if anyone else had something to add, but after that robust explanation, I'm sure we all feel like we can move on. But I do want to say I've been getting some, messages on the side since we've been broadcasting, and your stats are very much appreciated, Dr. Wallace. Just sharing those receipts with the people, it adds value to our conversation. Thank you for that. So my next question is for Jamon. So a common misconception, or a common opinion rather, that folks who oppose HBCUs have is the HBCU does not represent the real world. So sending young Black scholars to historically Black colleges sets them up for failure, because when they get out in the corporate world or the academic world, fewer and fewer people look like them. So how do you combat that?
Great question, right? And let me say, HBCUs might not be a reflection of the real world, but they will surely prepare you for the real world. Let me say that again for the people out there. They may not be a reflection of the real world, but they will prepare you for the real world. So let me just say this, and I just have to throw this out there, coming off the heels of Dr. Wallace, who gave us that amazing history. So when I visited Tuskegee University, visiting that campus, learning that in 1881, there was a slave and a slave owner who worked together to secure legislation dollars, to secure the Black vote, to get money to start an institution. They sent word to Hampton Institute, where our lovely Jamon Wallace graduated from, now Hampton University, and Dr. Booker T. Washington, who was educated there, he came to Tuskegee to start Tuskegee Normal School for Colored Teachers. And it started at the bottom of a church. And at that time, they were looking to train African-American, mostly men, to be teachers. That was kind of the idea. And over time, and over 130 years, of course, it has much evolved since then. But there's a statue on our campus of Booker T. Washington, and he is lifting the veil of ignorance from a Negro man. And on that statue, it says, he lifted the veil of ignorance from his people, and he pointed the way to progress through education and industry. Dr. Booker T. Washington, he believed that it was important to use your mind, but it was also important to use your hand. So if you ever have the luxury of visiting Tuskegee University, you will see that most buildings on our campus were hand built by students. And some students paid their way through Tuskegee by helping to build the campus. And Tuskegee is the only HBCU to be a national landmark, a national historic site, which means you can't knock down any of the buildings because most of the people, again, hand-built this campus. So when I think about this idea, and I was a tour guide, as you may have guessed by now, throwing out that history, I was a tour guide, and students would say, the world is, like, it's not just Black, but I would argue the world is not just Black and white. And when I think about going to Tuskegee, thinking about the preparation that I had for the world, when I got to Tuskegee, I was born and raised in Detroit. My roommate was from Atlanta, Georgia. And I met people from Iowa, Chicago, New York, the Bahamas, California. And when I met people from Cali, I'm like, y'all are weird. Like, people like from California are different. Even when I met people from Iowa, I'm like, Black people live in Iowa? Like, it was such a different yet rich experience. And being in this think tank of all these people that look like me, professors and teachers who truly raised me, trained me, shaped my mind, it prepared me for everything that came after. And when I think about, colleagues or people that I meet in the profession that struggle in some of these all white spaces, I know that I was prepared by everything that I experienced at my historically Black college. It prepared me for that experience. And again, it was more than just, my roommate and people that I met in my dorm or people I met in my fraternity. For me, I was a psychology major and I was studying the College of Arts and Sciences. And after a certain hour, the building closed. But the janitor in that building, we got real close. And she would allow me to stay in that building so that I could study, And to me, she was a part of my village. Because of her, I was able to use those late nights to study in this building that I should have been out of. But she looked out for me. And every time I go to Tuskegee, I make sure that I visit her. And she was born and raised in Tuskegee. And usually when I travel, I will get a keychain from places that I've gone to share with her. She's created bracelets. She'd be like, I went to church and they love my bracelet. But to me, she's a part of my village. It was more than just the people that I met. It was more than just teachers. It was everybody that I experienced in that place on those hollow grounds of that 4-year experience that truly prepared me for the real world.
Yes, sir. Also, facts and stats and receipts. It is appreciated. But I'm sure Dr. Brownrigg or Robert have something else to add to this particular question as well, because it is a very meaty one.
It is. It's extremely meaty. Should I answer my question or go with?
You can go ahead and just talk about the misconception and how you receive that as well.
I don't even know where to begin with it, because I think you all have covered everything that was trickling through my mind as you were speaking. I think the reality is that as Black people, to begin with, we are some of the most, to me, in America, we are feared when we are educated. And I feel like those of us who attend and have the opportunity to go to a place where you have the opportunity to engage in a meaningful way and learn more about who you are as people, it creates a greater level of fearlessness for the students, but fear for those people with whom you walk into the door and you are greeted with when you're going in for an interview or you're starting a job. Because there is a level of, let me find the right language. There's just a level of confidence that we embody that I'm not gonna say anyone, I cannot speak for anyone else. However, having worked not only in the United States, but in China as well, what I notice is when I come across HBCU grads, there's just a different level of confidence that you walk into the room with. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that there is a pride that you're proud of who you are, but you're also not bothered by anyone else's thing. You're not bothered by other people's whiteness or them being Asian, or you're not bothered by those things because you feel so confident in who you are as a person and what you have learned wherever you are, that it really doesn't matter. It's not a thing. So for me, I feel like that's the great part of the overall experience of attending an HBCU, is just the importance of understanding when you stepped off that boat, you did not lose anything as a person. Everything that they tried to strip away from you, you got it. You're here with it. Your pride in your skin tone, your religion, what you know, what you've learned, all of that is still in you, and nothing can remove that from who you are as a person. So that's my spiel.
And I just like to piggyback on that as well. I mean, me as an African-American male, my confidence level was already out the roof. Okay, just me as an African-American male. But looking at, say, for instance, my school being 7% Anglo-Saxon, I knew I had to do more. Okay, so when I went back to that HBCU and I had that experience with all of these beautiful professors, all of these beautiful people that look like me. When I went other places, like Mr. Neal said, it was my confidence spurred out. And I felt like it wasn't me that had to adapt. It was them that had to adapt. I felt like I was already there. So attending an HBCU is something, it's an experience, okay? I can give you a book and I can give the guy beside you a book and say, learn this, and y'all can both read it and possibly learn and remember if you can remember the same thing. But if I put you in an experience to learn in different spots, your experience is going to be different, okay? So I think it's all about the experience growing up that you can't get at any other college other than an HBCU. That's just my personal take. So,
can I jump in with a couple comments on like some of the things that the other panelists brought up that just kind of like stuck with me. So the first was, you know, not a reflection of the real world. Like Jamon was saying, like I met people from every different walk of life at a HBCU. There was a white girl on the basketball team. The tennis team was from Brazil. Like I met, and actually I think HBCUs are more diverse than predominantly white institutions, to be honest. When you're thinking about these predominantly white institutions, many of them have less than 8% African-American students. So, so that's the one thing. The other thing I think Jamon kind of touched on a little bit was just kind of the relationships that you build with the community there, the people, the cafeteria workers, the janitorial staff. When I was in grad school, we learned about this whole concept. It's called other mothering. And that's something that is very familiar to HBCUs. And I can remember, you know, back when I was in college, we would have career fairs on campus. And I remember like, if you came into that convocation center and you did not have the correct attire on, you did not have your resume together, you were not let in. You were sent back to your room to get it together because they cared about us. They wanted to see us successful. They wanted to see us do well. And then fast forward maybe 15 years, I worked in the Career Center at the University of Georgia. Nobody was telling people to take their stilettos off and to not wear that pink suit. They were free to go into that Career Center and potentially not get job opportunities because nobody cared about them. So I just want to jump in with those two comments.
It's a proud deal. And let me say this. When I got to Prairie View A&M University, my dad is a pastor. And obviously I'm spiritual as well. But when I got there, I got with a group of people who were faith-based. And they, in turn, took me to a place a church that adopted me. So it was like I forgot what you call it, but it was like my church in Prairie View. So I'm like, where else can you go in the world and find a church that's going to adopt you? And some of the things like that. So just some of those experiences that you get is, you know, goes without saying.
I was responding in the chat. I think what you're describing is watch care. Yeah. So that's just the Baptist girl in me. I had to think through that. So my next question is for Dr. Brown-Rigg. So along similar lines, there's also a school of thought that an HBCU education is inferior to a PWI education. And for those of us on the call, HBCU, of course, is historically Black colleges and universities, and PWI is predominantly white institutions. And so I'll just rephrase the question. There is a common thought that an HBCU education is not as good as, or it doesn't carry the same weight as an education from a PWI. And I know all of my panelists have a lot to say about this, so we will just start with Dr. Brown-Rigg, and whenever she's done, feel welcome to jump in if you have anything to add.
Well, I feel like I need to cross my leg as I answer this question, because this is one that always comes up in conversation. Why did you choose to go to an HBCU? Why didn't you go to the University of Alabama or the University of Alabama in Birmingham? They're right up the street. The answer for me is all in the college fair. Attend a college fair at an HBCU, and you will see some of the most prestigious companies in the United States there court our students, to the point of co-ops, summer job opportunities, even also providing them opportunities to work after they've graduated. I believe that the education that you get is what you make of it. I know people who have gone to PWIs and done very well. I know people who've gone to HBCUs and done very well. I think it's up to the person. I have a former student who, when I taught in Texas, he was, I would say, a little on the lazy side, but he was very, very, very smart. And his senior year of high school, his mother wanted him to take the test so that he could opt out of taking freshman English. He took it, passed it with flying colors. He didn't want to take it. And then when it became time to start looking at colleges, he had the opportunity to go to Texas Tech on a full ride. And his mother came to me and said, I don't feel good about it. And I was like, well, why don't you feel good about it? And she's like, I know it's going to be paid for. She said, but he also got accepted to Morehouse, but I don't have any money to pay for it. I said, well, anything that's worth something, you're going to figure it out. So instead of going to Tech, he went to Morehouse. Upon graduating, he got a full ride for graduate school to Columbia. Upon leaving there, he took another fellowship in Beijing and was there for 2 years. I believe that college, going wherever you're going to go, is what you make of the experience. For me, however, and anyone that I know that has attended an HBCU, the experiences you get there absolutely shape who you are and give you an opportunity to just no longer be concerned with that part of going out and working in the workforce. As I said earlier, it's just the level of confidence that comes along with the experience that's going to propel you in the future. Do I feel like an HBCU experience is, superior to that of a PWI? I can't say. I went to graduate school at a PWI. I can say that the experience was absolutely different. However, at the end of the day, who I am, I honestly, within my heart, believe came from my experience at Tuskegee. That absolutely shaped who I was when I went out into the world. So whether it's more prestigious or not is in the eye of the beholder. However, I do feel like you have an opportunity to make the best of who you are when your confidence in who you are is just a little different. And that's who I believe we become when we have that 4 years to work with and become colleagues with and classmates with. And as you said, that watch care. I just remember, what is the name? Is the name of the church, Jamon? Is it Mount Olive? Is that the name of the church in Tuskegee? Mount Olive takes care of all the students. Washington Chapel, the church, takes care of the students. There is just this level of community, and Tuskegee is a college town. If you go to Tuskegee, you'll see that all that's really there is Tuskegee University, the historic site, Booker T. Washington's home, Moton Field. Everything is surrounded by the university. And because of that, the community takes on a responsibility for the students because it's so small. And because we are so joined together, once you go there, you are a part of Tuskegee, the city. So the prestige for me comes in the confidence and the pride that I feel as a person when I go out into the workforce. I feel like there were times when I was working with people who did not feel as good about what they were doing because their confidence level was not there. And I'm, be a risk taker. Go out here and try some new things. Well, why do you feel that way? I had to stand outside of Kresge for hours to try and get registered back in the day before they had computers. So I know what a struggle looks like, and I know what it looks like and feels like to have to work a little harder to get what you need. So do I feel like there's a prestige that goes along with or without? I'm not sure. I can't say that. I know for me, I don't feel any more superior than anyone else, but I do feel like my experience was probably better than a lot of my peers who did not have these same experiences I did. So I hope I answered the question. Did I answer? And I think earlier when you gave the statistics, you basically wrapped it up. I mean, when you think of the fact that just in Tuskegee alone, 70% of your veterinarians of color come from the School of Veterinary Medicine. When you look at over half of your engineers in the United States of America, they come from your Alabama A&Ms, your FAMU, who has an amazing engineering program. Your Tuskegee, your top producers in the country come from HBCUs. So if that's what we're looking at for prestige, then I would say yes.
And can I just add something else? I think one thing, like, I want to get out of this idea that HBCUs, for whatever reason, are inferior. Like, to me, it's not necessarily a comparison. And for me, when I think about how I navigate the workspace or how I navigate anything, I'm not shaken up because I'm in the room with somebody from Harvard or because somebody has a degree from Stanford. Like, to me, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, because I feel like my Tuskegee degree, my Tuskegee education holds the same weight, if not more. And, you know, one thing that I always think about is when you talk about prestige, like, again, that doesn't necessarily mean anything to me, but I can confidently say, or I feel like, again, you get the education, but there are so many things that you gain outside of that classroom experience that really, really feeds into you, manifests into you, shapes your mind into who you may become. So for me, when, you know, I'm working in different spaces, like, I know I'm prepared, probably more prepared than someone else. My mentor at Tuskegee, she always tells the story. She took a class at Auburn University, which is a PWI. She took it up the street. Auburn's very close to Tuskegee. And she went to Tuskegee in the 90s. And she always says, when she got to Tuskegee and she took that chemistry class, students were using calculators. And she would say, oh, we do this by hand. I don't use a calculator. This is how I learned it at Tuskegee, you know? So thinking about these skills that you are taught to, again, prepare you for the real world, it's to me, there's no comparison, you know, just because there's a Stanford, you know, we always joke that Tuskegee's the Harvard of the South. So to me, there's no comparison in the two.
Well, real quick. Go ahead.
Well, the question was actually going to be for you, Robert, but go ahead and I'll ask your question after you're done.
Well, I was just going to give a quick story of me and my experience when I first got out of college. After I got my degree in administration, I went back to my hometown. And this was the same place where there was predominantly, again, Anglo-Saxon. And even at that same school, a teacher told me I wasn't college material. After I told her I wanted to go to LSU and play football, she told me I wasn't college material. And I came back to be her principal. But even after that, the young lady that came on at the same time that I did, the superintendent there, he knew me and he was still there when I came back. So he knew the old me and from the streets and from the neighborhood or whatever. And he did not want me to be in the administration with everybody else. But there was this other girl that went to a PWI that he said, oh, she has all these accolades or whatever, and we want her. Well, the principal just so happened to be African-American, and she voted me in and she took me in. Well, the second year, that young lady was fired, and I had been there 17 years and watched many go after me that came before me. So in saying that, it's not about the college, the prestige of the college. To me, it's about how you react in certain situations. And at Prairie View University, I was given those tools to be able to adapt in any situation.
Thank you for that. while you are on the mic, Mr. Destin, can you talk a little bit about employment opportunities that are available to HBCU grads? Because again, a common misconception is, you know, the PWIs have the huge alumni networks and then they can go and, you know, get all kinds of great job opportunities. And that isn't the case for HBCU grads. So what do you have to say to that?
I mean, I think the pendulum is swinging our way now with everything that's going on. I think we get more opportunities. I think that a vast majority of companies want diversity to me in their companies. So I would say back in the day, I would say no. Right now, I think that things are changing. People do need diversity. They see the value that we as African Americans and coming from an HBCU bring to their company with our diverse backgrounds. So I think that things are changing right now. I think in the future, and that's just me, I think it was that good old boy system that was there, that was set in place to keep us back, just like, you know, in the 60s and 50s, and it was there. So right now, I think that the younger generation have a different mindset, and even the companies have a different mindset. I think it's just about who you are and how you're going to interview, who you impress. But sometimes it is about who you know. So in saying that, I think that it depends. It depends, but I do feel like right now it's changing, and we do have opportunities way bigger than we used to have.
I definitely would love to jump in with a couple comments. You know, I graduated from Hampton in 2000, and thinking back to the year that I graduated, I referenced the career fair. The employers that were there were representing the best companies across the country. All of my friends, before we graduated, everyone either had a job or they were going to graduate school. So I had friends that were going to Goldman Sachs, MTV, Gatorade, CoverGirl, like all of the best companies across the country. And I will also say, I think, I just lost my train of thought. So I'm gonna let Danielle jump in. I have a good comment. It might come back. Danielle, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna actually piggyback off of that. I just remember being a senior, and we had a school district. I was an education major, and people used to, oh, that's a layup major. It's a layup major. We had actually had a school district come from Maryland, courting our education students, flew us to Maryland to actually visit. I ended up moving to Maryland with one of my profiles. We were roommates, but at the time there were 7 other Tuskegee graduates that had graduated earlier than myself, working for Boeing, Raytheon, Booz Allen, in the Air Force, working at the Naval Academy. I know for myself, in the early and late 90s, there was no difference in where we were working and other people. I was watching my friends graduate and go to the same the same jobs as other people were going. And the expectation for graduate school, I think, was a bit different, because I never got the conversation of if you go to graduate school. It was when you go to graduate school. That was the conversation that I was having with my professors. I know in the education department, it was when you go to graduate school, when you get a degree in administration or school counseling or whatever you choose to do next. We have the same opportunity. I remember most recent job before working at Alabama A&M, I was going to, I decided I wanted to move abroad for some years. So my son and I had an interview with a school in China. And when I had my interview, the person who interviewed me had never worked with a Black person in her life. She was Scottish. She had worked in Asia, Bangladesh, lots of other places, and had never worked with anyone. And she said, I've never come across such a rich resume. She was like, where is Tuskegee University? Where is that? And so we got into a conversation. I got the job. Spent 4 years in China with this lady, and now she wants to visit Tuskegee because she thinks, oh my gosh, I don't know. It's just I really don't feel like I don't know. I think they come to get the best and the brightest from.
Yeah, but I think a little different. I think they'll give you the job. Back then, they'll give it to you, but what about the promotions? Yeah, they'll put you in the door, but are you getting the same promotions as everybody else is getting?
I'll just say from my experience with the people I associate, I don't know what your network look like, but this Tuskegee network, they're actually running the company.
No, and I get it.
They're
and I'm
getting the promotions, they're getting the job.
And I'm speaking of back in the day. I think now, yes, I definitely feel like it's the way you said it. But for me and some of my experiences back in the day, those things were different and it was a little harder to get in the door. Right now, it's the place to be. Like I said, I think it swung to our side. But back then, for me and my experiences, looking at some of the things that were going on in Houston and the surrounding areas in the South and whatnot, there were, some of them would let you in the door, but then, you would see other people move up before you. That was back then. Now I think the pendulum has swung.
And can I just add one thing, because I recruited at Morehouse, and I would always tell young men, and we've all dropped names of companies that, some of our friends or peers went off to, but I would always tell young men that, companies are trying to diversify, right? That's a huge thing in this day and age. Exactly. And when you think about diversity, they're not going to Harvard to get the top Black recruits. They're going to Morehouse, they're going to Howard, they're going to Tuskegee, they're going to Hampton. So I just want to say that and throw that out there that, some of these companies, we can name companies for days, but I would always tell young men that if, these top companies, they're not going to Stanford to look for the top Black minds. They're going to Harvard. I mean, they're going to Howard, places like that. So, they're going to Spelman, again, to get some of these top Black minds so that they can add this diversity, because that's what companies are trying to do. So I just want to throw that out there.
Agreed. And I remembered my thought. So my first job was working in college admissions. And I remember my boss looked at my resume and she said, I saw Hampton on there. Like I knew the product. So I knew that you were going to be successful in this role. The other thing that assisted in getting that job, we've talked a little bit about Black Greek letter organizations. And so one of the hiring managers at that job was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha, which is the brother fraternity to my sorority, Alpha Kappa Alpha. And he was like, I saw that you were AKA. I knew that we wanted you to come in. And so being able to utilize all of those touch points and networks really, really have helped and have helped, I know, a lot of my friends and others that have gone to HBCUs as well.
Thank you for all of the context you're providing. The only thing I will add is HBCUs offer an affirming and supportive space for Black students, and we cannot protect our Black students from institutional racism that exists outside those walls. And so the discussion about promotion opportunities and who gets the job and all of those things, we understand the good old boy network is still here. We understand sexism is still here, racism, all the other isms. And so I don't want to conflate the two. I don't want us to have that conversation in the midst of the conversation that is surrounding support for our historically Black colleges and universities. I just wanted to add that before we move on. I will say there are some great questions in the chat, so I want to go ahead and get started on those. And panelists, just feel free to jump in if anything speaks to you. So I am moving to the Q&A box here. Okay, so Sanjay, he asks, how can we ensure and encourage the viability and sustainability of HBCUs? Dr. Brown-Rigg?
Spending some time as a high school counselor, I think that a lot of it comes in making sure that it's an option on the table, like not having it as a side piece or having it as a side conversation later, a just in case, making it an actual option when you speak to students and letting them know that this is available to you just as well as these other schools. I think that's number one. I think number two is surrounding children with, well, I can only give my own example. My child, all he knows is an HBCU. Now, that wasn't on purpose. He's surrounded by my friends, my family. Many of my friends attended Tuskegee. Many of my family members attended Alabama A&M University here in Huntsville, or other HBCU, Spelman, cousins went to Howard. That's the culture of people that he's been raised around. So in his mind, that's the option. Everything else is extra. And I'm not saying that needs to happen for all children, but as a school counselor, I feel like every school counselor has a responsibility, especially to your students of color. Let them know that there is a place that they can go where they can attain a world-class education and have 4 years of absolute love, abundance, and learning that comes along with also able to go out into the workforce and say, this is where I was educated. The rich history of who we are as HBCU graduates. I think we have to continue to imbue that in our children, share that with the world. I think they need to run a different world again. They need to throw it back on TV because right now is the time. Our children need to see it. But I do feel those of us who work in secondary education, working in high schools or even middle schools and elementary schools, I think we all need to continue to make sure that that option is placed on everything else. Besides Texas Tech needs to be Prairie View A&M, and there needs to be no discussion in the difference except this is a historically Black school. Just don't feel our school counselors do a good enough job, and a lot of it is because they're not educated on what an HBCU is and ways to help students learn about them. And I don't know if that comes with us, beginning to have those conversations, sitting down with school counselors and sharing with them, making sure this is another option for your students. But I think in order to make it just as relevant as any other place, we got to keep having a conversation. We got to keep walking, talking the talk, and making sure that children know that they have a place where they can go, where they're going to get just as good of an education, but have that 4 years of an experience that they will never, ever in their life be able to match anywhere else.
Thank you for that, Dr. Brownrigg. Dr. Wallace, you had something to add?
Yeah, I would go ahead and jump in. Also, I think there's definitely work that needs to be done on the HBCU side in terms of admissions. Working in college counseling and college admissions, I'm always trying to get HBCUs to come visit and to be represented at my school. But sometimes it's a little difficult. And I think really the root of it is, when you think about the history of HBCUs, when they started, we didn't have to recruit because that was the only option that we had. And so, as I talked a little bit about the history and we got into like 70s, 80s, these predominantly white institutions were aggressively going after Black students and really trying to increase their diversity numbers, and HBCUs didn't really move too much. And I think, a lot of times the admission staff at HBCUs tend to be alums who may have been there for I remember going to visit, I think it might have been Alabama A&M maybe. And the tour guy, he was like 75 years old and he was so happy. He was an alum. He was so proud and it was so adorable and so cute, but it didn't necessarily translate well to a 17-year-old kid that's looking for colleges. And so I think there's definitely there's work that needs to be done on the HBCU side in terms of really going after and recruiting these top students across the country. We definitely need to do more than just a college fair. We need to make visits to these high schools. We need to maybe partner with some PWIs in presentations to share information about the history and all the accomplishments of these institutions, because people just are not familiar and aware.
Just wanted to add that a friend of mine, Raynell, she is on the call, but I just wanted to voice over something. She said she attended North Carolina A&T, and she wants y'all to know they are the largest HBCU, and hold on, let me get the facts. Hold on. And number one producer of Black engineers. And I'm voicing that over because there's a question here, and I think it dovetails perfectly. So Nia, she just wanted to talk through how we are often promoting the same few HBCUs over others. And so how can we be more inclusive in our conversations about HBCUs? Because even just in our short time together, we've probably said the same 5 or so. And of course, we're representing our alma mater and schools we know things about. So I want to be fair and say that, but also the broader context is, how do we get beyond that like top 10 list, right? How do we get beyond that and get students to look into all of the HBCUs that our country has to offer?
I mean, I can jump into that. I think that our African-American athletes, they should have a big play in that as well. Just like Deion Sanders, he's going to Jackson State. You know what that's going to do for HBCU football, period. I think Florida and everybody else is scared of the recruiting process at this point. You got Deion Sanders, you know what I'm saying? So I think that some of our athletes and celebrities have to start using their stage to promote these historically Black universities as well. And I think that's a big, big start to helping us.
Dr. Brownrigg, I saw you come off mute. Did you have something to add? Oh, you're on mute now.
Doing too much. Okay. I think a part of it too, and I think I put it in the chat, was we got to tap into these alumni clubs. I know Tuskegee's alumni clubs across the United States are extremely active when need be. A lot of it is opportunity, if they know that there's a high school that wants more information, they'll go visit. And I don't know if that's a resource that we have tapped into in order to get information. I saw somebody post a question in the Q&A about getting more HBCU information in California. I know the love there is deep. There are plenty of them, and they have amazing stories because California is so far from Alabama. Some of them are legacies. Their parents went there, their family members went there. Some of them are first generation college students. And I think that a lot of that is testimony to, they'll say someone from the alumni club came to visit my high school, or someone from the alumni club came to visit my church. I think that is an amazing resource in cities or in places where HBCUs are not as predominant, or you don't have any in that area. I think that's a great resource to have. So in terms of getting more visibility and providing opportunities for engagement, I think that's a great resource to tap into.
And I would also say that, I can't speak on behalf of what HBCUs themselves, the campuses, are doing to necessarily help with that. recruitment and so forth. But I think we have to do better, as people who are aware and knowledgeable about HBCUs, to not just condition students to think about the Howard. And I tell students, like, Howard is not the only HBCU in the world. Let me start with that, but, to tell students about Rusk College or Dillard or Talladega College or Cheney, there's so many out there, right? So I think it's also up to us to, do a better job. When I have students who ask about schools, depending on what they're looking for, I am asking them to look at, University of Arkansas, Pine Bluff, or, thinking about other schools that they won't necessarily know, because for them, they are just looking at literally Howard, Spelman, Morehouse. Tuskegee don't even make the list, and I'm offended, but, absolutely having them think about other schools.
Thank you for that. So I want to voice over Tamika's question. She says she helps families understand financial aid and the FAFSA and search for scholarships. How can she best advise students on the out-of-state cost of attending an out-of-state HBCU for those whose decision comes down to cost?
I would just say for me, and I speak on behalf of Tuskegee, for example, or Morehouse, and I know still like these top two schools, but Tuskegee is a private school, so the cost is the same for an in-state student or out-of-state student. So I always let them know that. And a lot of HBCUs are private schools. So for that reason, most of them, the cost would be the same. I was from Michigan. My cost was the same for a student who's from Alabama. So that's usually the same, but also helping them understand the value of scholarships and thinking about places like the United Negro College Fund, a big filter for scholarships. But I always tell students that for me, for example, I had one scholarship coming into Tuskegee. And as I became a student, I received a scholarship for being a tour guide. I received a scholarship from the Alumni Association. I was in a research program, so I conducted research for 2 years, and that paid for some of my tuition. So there are a lot of funds once you also get on campus. So I always tell students not to let that necessarily deter them. And I know that's tough. You have to talk through it and have these conversations, but there are also a lot of outside scholarships, as well as a lot of scholarships once you actually put your feet on the campus.
To piggyback off of what he just said, I think too, that is a huge part of every conversation I would have with a parent, whether their child was going to a PWI or a HBC. Where am I going to get the money? And a lot of it, I honestly say, some of my parents, they just didn't plan well. Maybe they were not college graduates, so they didn't plan well when their children were getting in high school, and then really encourage them to try to make the grades to where they would get particular monies that would be available to students who made grades. But again, tapping into your local organizations, not just your Greek letter organizations, but just community organizations, speaking with your church. There's a lot of money out there. I just helped one of my good friends. His daughter goes to Dillard, and she needed some information, just some help in trying to prepare for a scholarship, and she ended up getting it. So now she's working for, I think it's Frito-Lay. She ended up getting some money for, and they're gonna fund the 4 years, the next 3 years, I should say. 3 more years ago, they're gonna fund that, and it was all on going to look for it, researching, getting the information. So I think too, we just have to do a better job of just encouraging the kids to be a lot more proactive instead of waiting for money to come to them. Go find the money, because it's out there. Plenty of companies offering money for you to go to school, and then might give you a job. Look at the ROTC. I know everybody wants to, oh my gosh, the military. You have a 4-year obligation once you're done, and your education is paid for, and you serve your country. You've done something. You've been a good citizen. So I know plenty of people who've done that as well. So if we're talking about looking for, it's out there. You just gotta look for it.
Just to put it back on you, Tanil, I don't mean to cut you off, but as a principal, we gave out every single year over 150 scholarships. Over 150 scholarships. You know how many of those were us or people that look like us? Probably 15%. And it was stuff that I would beg my students, hey, look, go talk to the council. Look, we got all these, she had pages and pages of different scholarships to apply for. So we got to educate our students on applying for those different scholarships. And they might be little, but I promise you, they add up. We had people coming out getting $100,000, kids who didn't play sports, because they applied for all of these different scholarships that some people didn't apply for. So it's about taking the time, being knowledgeable and educated on what's in front of you and what you can do too, as well.
I'll just add that, the cost of attending college is real, and it doesn't always work out to your benefit to attend one institution over the other. So you do have to make the decision that works best for you and your family. However, as many of us have mentioned earlier, undergrad isn't always your only stop. So also think about it through that lens. Let's say you do get that full ride at a PWI and your family just can't turn that down. I get it, because if you can graduate with little to no debt, do that. But just know the same institutions, the same HBCUs that offer these stellar undergrad experiences, they have grad school as well. You can earn a master's, you can earn a doctorate, you can get a trade at some of the technical HBCUs. There are so many opportunities to receive an HBCU education. So if you don't get it on that first round, it is okay. You can set yourself up to pursue that a little bit later on. Okay, so Sanjay, he says, I am bothered by the deficit mindset from which we currently approach HBCUs. It was never this heavy pre-integration. Can you speak to what created this shift, and how do we get HBCUs back into more positive and affirming conversations on a macro level? It's heavy. Take a minute.
It seems like no one is trying to engage with that particular question. Can you repeat that last part again? Because I want to make sure that.
Absolutely. So he just talked about the deficit mindset from which we approach HBCUs. And can we speak to what created the shift from HBCUs being in this positive and affirming light to the deficit approach? And then how do we shift it back? How do we get HBCUs back in that affirming positive conversation on a macro level?
Okay, so I'm gonna address this as, as politically correct as I can. I think that there was a time when HBCUs, of course, were looked at as, the normal Negro schools, school for teachers or whatever the designation was. And once HBCUs began to create and develop broader programs and include graduate programs and doctoral programs, graduate school, law schools, there became a shift in the idea of who we should be, because we were no longer being the teachers as though that was a bad thing. I don't know why. Or being less than, or having what they consider to be just a trade. And we were beginning to sit as judges and doctors and lawyers. And like anything else, the fear of who we were becoming as a people created this negative connotation to add to going to an HBCU. Oh, they're the ghetto. Oh, they're all, they're too expensive to go to. Why would you want to do that? You don't get as good of an education. And that's what it turned into. The only way that the conversation is going to shift is it's going to have to start with us. Those of us who attended HBCUs, continuing to do the good work that we've been doing in the communities and in our workspaces, and showing that we're just as competent and that we have just as good of, we receive just an elite education just like anyone else, and there's no difference. I think it was the fear of who we were becoming as a people, just to be honest with you. And when you mention these schools, and I'm not even talking about the big schools, I'm talking, or the schools that we say are so well known, I'm talking about your Wiley colleges and your Fisk's. These are places that have created some of the most amazing minds in this country and in this world. So to think about the fear of what that created for other people, I can see how the conversation shifted and we began to look as though that was an inferior choice to other choices. So again, I think it's upon us as graduates to continue to share our stories and to enlighten those ignorant and do not know the greatness that comes from those grounds.
I definitely would agree with all of that. And then I just think about American society as a whole, just the shift in culture that we've experienced. And so I think as we approach kind of like the 2000s, like people, started to get in this mindset like, oh, racism doesn't exist. And, then people are so caught up with wanting the best of the best. And so, you have the US News World and Report rankings, and you definitely want to go to a school that's within that top 10 because it's the best. And so I think some of those things contributed to kind of straying away from the value of these institutions. But with everything going on today, I think that we're shifting again, and people are recognizing that for many Black students, these can be really safe, empowering places. And so I'm hopeful that, with everything that's going on in our country, people are going to kind of open their eyes and recognize the value of these institutions again. And I absolutely agree. It's up to us as alums to really promote that. And that's one thing I love about being a HBCU alum is that, anybody that tells me they went to an HBCU, I have automatic love. Like, it doesn't even matter what school, because we all are very protective of our schools. We love our institutions. But if you are a part of that club, there's nothing but love. And so I think, us as alums doing a better job of really kind of articulating what that experience was, because I think so many of us, we can't even really put it into words. We just know that there's something so special and so great about it. And so we've got to get that message out there.
And can I just add, and I want to preface this with that HBCUs, it's not this golden experience for everybody. I want to say that. Like, I have been giving since I stepped across the stage at Tuskegee, and I have a classmate who is adamant that she'll never give back because of her own experience. So I want to preface with that. But I want to say that I think for the shift, the question about how did we shift here? We all work with students, day in and day out. For some of us who are college counselors, students today, they want things handed to them. This idea of hard work and things like that, they want things handed to them. Like, you have students who will email you and email you again and email you again, like, Mr. Pulliam, I emailed you. And it's like, what do you want from me? Like, students want things handed to them. So I think over time, when you think about how students started to visit HBCUs and they see some of the deferred maintenance and they see some of these buildings, but then they go to other schools and they have these shiny cafeterias and they have these brand new buildings, and some of these PWIs are throwing money at Black students. I think that is a big cause of our shift. Even when I was at Tuskegee, I spent the summer at the University of Notre Dame doing research, and Notre Dame was, resourced. It was a very well-resourced institution, and it was a very different experience, but it was just an experience for me to grab some tools, get some research experience to take that back to Tuskegee. But for some students, why would I go through this experience in this dorm that looks like a jail cell when I could be in a hotel? for example. So I think students today, I think some of that shift comes from students wanting things handed to them and knowing that, why would I go through this experience that you speak so highly of? Because that's what we're doing. We're speaking very highly of this experience. Why would I go through that when I can, have breakfast in bed at Notre Dame? Like, why would I do that? So I think some of the shift has come from that as well.
Thank you for adding that, because I intended to voice over Daynette's comment. And then I have a question from Mara that I want to make sure we get to before we end our call today. Daynette, she said, let's be honest, we play an important role in how HBCUs are thought of, because we've been conditioned to prepare ourselves to enter their world. Therefore, we strive to enter those high-level institutions. So it's kind of along the same lines of what you were saying, Jamon, at first. Again, HBCU experiences are vast and beautiful and nuanced, but they are not for every Black student. And it is okay. It is okay to choose another path for yourself. And a comment on what Dr. Wallace said earlier, my husband is an alum of Langston University, which is the only HBCU in the state of Oklahoma. And I was joking about something. I went to the University of Oklahoma. He was at Langston. So we were about an hour apart. And I don't know, I said something in jest about Langston. And he said, wait a minute, I can talk about my school. But you, ma'am, you may not talk about my school. So I learned on that day that it's kind of like your mama. You can get mad at your mama, talk about your mama, but can't nobody else talk about your mama. So HBCU alum, and unfortunately, none of my degrees have come from HBCU, so I'm the person on the call who has that outside perspective. But what I can share is that every HBCU alum I know has an immense level of pride in their institution, in their experience, and the connections that they made when they were in college are unlike what I've seen in my own experience. So I did want to ask Mara's question, because I think this is a really good one as well. Can you provide guidance on how to respond to non-Black folks who basically want to know why we need our own schools or why we have HBCUs? She said she knows in her head and in her heart why HBCUs matter, but verbalizing it is hard. So can we give Mara some tools to share?
Well, I think definitely sharing the history of the schools with students, I think is extremely helpful and important. But I also, with my students, they're welcome to attend HBCUs. We are happy to have you. We welcome everyone. You may even be able to get a minority scholarship. So yeah, I think having a conversation and just sharing the history, why these institutions were established. We didn't have any other options. And so that's why they had to be established. But as we look at HBCUs today, we are extremely inclusive. And if students from other backgrounds want to participate in our education system, they are absolutely welcome to.
And I would also add that, this question of why do we have our own schools? I mean, we have our own schools, as Joanne alluded to, about the history, because we couldn't go to other schools. So it more so becomes a conversation of like, why are they still important today, which is a whole different conversation. But I would say that's why we have our own schools. And I tell students, like, we couldn't go to a Michigan State or University of Alabama or these different schools, Ole Miss or whatever the case may be. And that's why we have our own schools. And I think it's important for people to understand the history, and people go for different reasons, don't get me wrong, but I think it's important that people understand that that's why they were created. So that's a big reason of why we have our own schools. And it's not just historically Black colleges, Hispanic serving institutions have come out, and, they're adding more and more out there. So, they're trying to create spaces for students where, and I tell my students, like, you'll be the minority for the rest of your life. So why not spend 4 years as the majority? So that's important to note.
And I was going to piggyback off that and just say, the same thing in regards to just the safe space. Like, it's necessary, especially given right now, we are not that far removed from slavery. Let's not act like we are so far ahead as a nation. It's still necessary for lots of reasons, but one being just a safe space to learn, a safe space to learn, a safe space to learn more about who you are as a person, and to learn more about the rich history of who we are as a people. And I really feel like just the fact that we're not that far removed from such negative times, I mean, look at where we're sitting right now. So I just feel like I totally agree with you in that it's just a safe space. I mean, I really, to be honest with you, there was a thread on Facebook, and this is nothing against any other school, but there was a thread on Facebook when George Floyd was killed. And the thread said, so are we ready to talk about the racism at blank school? And I have friends that went to school there who were chiming in. There were over 3,000 comments about what Black children were experiencing in the year 2019 and the year 2020 at this particular school. I would never want my son to go somewhere like that. I'll just be honest with you. Because as a parent, I want him to be somewhere where learning is the only thing he needs to worry about, and not worrying about the safety of who he is as a Black man and as a human being, because people are walking around with nooses on campus and doing things that are not only disrespectful, but also to you because of the color of your skin. So you want to talk about necessity? Necessity for me as a parent is safety.
The only thing I will add to that is from an adult perspective. So, you know, Dr. Brownrigg just spoke from a parent perspective. And I'm also a parent. I have an 18-month-old son, and then I'm raising my 16-year-old sister. My husband and I began raising her after my mom's passing. And so, you know, initially when we started the college search process, I told her, because of what I do for a living, I know she was worried I was going to be all in her mix. But I told her, this is your process, this is your decision. But then a Tatiana Jefferson was murdered. And I had a little bit more of a stiff back. And then here we are, Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd. I mean, the countless folks, as I mentioned earlier, right? So I'm no longer going to be able to be hands off in her process, because I will be looking for the things she won't be looking for necessarily. Because of course, as a teenager, she's not supposed to be carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. I can do that for her. But yes, safety 100%. And also I will say, as a professional, not only should we look at HBCUs for our students, but we need to look at Black affirming spaces for ourselves, for our mental health, for our stability. How many of us have experienced trauma in the workplace because of the color of our skin, because of our gender? And so I get it. We want our kids to be prepared for the real world, but I'm so sorry, I forgot who just said it, but why not let them be in a place where they can be sheltered for a little while longer? Because the world is cold. And so if we can have space, if we can have solidarity for our students, if we can have a place that loves them for who they are, then why not offer them that opportunity to be educated? I see you, Jamon. Why not offer them the opportunity to be educated in a place that loves them from the top of their head to the sole of their feet? So I will stop there because I will get emotional. But 100%, we want everyone on this call. If you are a student, we want you to choose the place that's best for you, period. We want that for you. If you're a professional on this call and you advise Black students and you are unfamiliar with HBCUs, we invite you to educate yourself. And I say that to me too, because I don't know everything there is to know about all HBCUs. So it's a constant evolution for me as well. But we owe it to our students to be able to offer them options that will be as safe as possible for them. Jamon?
I just want to say something really quick, and I know we're coming down to the last few minutes, but I want to echo that point to any students on this call that it's important that you do your own research. And I mentioned it earlier, but all HBCUs or the HBCU experience is not for everyone. I think our hope is after leaving this, yes, you've learned a lot of information, you've heard the history, you've listened to these alums who are so passionate about their schools and HBCUs in general, but please know that they are not necessarily for everyone. And I think, Queen Sugar came out this year, and for people who are Queen and Slim, and people who saw that movie, I think the big theme there was that all skin folk are not kinfolk, or however that saying goes, And when I think about, Ashley, you said something to the effect of like, go to a place where your full self will be nurtured. And in some aspects, I have to respectfully disagree, because even when I think about myself, someone a part of the LGBTQ community, I can't say as I explore my identity that I felt necessarily safe to be myself in the Bible Belt of the South. So I think it's important that students explore what you are looking for, what's important to you, why you want to be there. Absolutely, I had a great experience at Tuskegee, don't get me wrong. But when I think about the full self, just because you are in this all Black space, that don't mean that everybody's looking out for you. I had that experience. However, I think it's important to note that all aspects, because, Black identity is not one thing. It's cross intersectional in so many ways. So when you think about your Black identity and maybe your queer identity, maybe both of those don't fit on an HBCU campus. So it's important to find what's important to you and where you will feel like you can be your most full self. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
And I do acknowledge that I often speak from a place of hetero privilege. And that is something I had not considered when I made my comment. So I thank you, Jamon, for lifting that up and making me better. Anyone else? Is there anything you'd like to add as we wrap up? Free for all. Anyone want to share any point that you would like to push a little bit further? We have a few minutes.
I just want to encourage all of the students, just engage in the process and do as much research as you can to find the best place that's going to fit you. You're going to find that there's so many options out there, so many different places you can go. I only found out recently, maybe about 7 years ago, that the University of Virgin Islands was an HBCU. And I'm like, dang, why I ain't go to school there? I could have been on a whole island. I mean, there are so many options for places to go to PWI or an HBCU. And I know that times are hard given the current pandemic, but lots of schools are giving virtual walkthroughs, virtual tours. I had my son recently, he's in the 11th grade. I had him choose his top 5, and he had to find people to interview from those schools. I helped him, but he had to watch videos. He had to, because he's made his choice. But as a parent, I want you to make an informed choice. I don't want you to make the choice based off of what you've seen your entire life, but rather do some research and find out what's going to be in your best interest. Because you may find that the choice you're chosen is not going to be in your best interest given your future plans. So think ahead. Think, is this going to lead me to be able to go to grad school where I want to go? Am I going to be able to go to law school with a degree from this school? And again, there are many choices. So I just encourage all students as a high schooler, please do your research. See what's out there, see what's available, talk to your parents, find out where the money is, and make a very informed choice, because this will be a choice that really does affect the rest of your life.
I absolutely agree. I think it's so important for students to really do their research and understand that there's not one perfect fit school. As much as I love Hampton, I could have been happy at 1,000 other places and could have had a great experience. So be open and do not let those rankings guide you. Think about yourself, what you value. I always say, like, a good way to kind of research schools, look at the school's mission statement. Does that mission statement align with your values and your beliefs? And just really, this is probably the biggest decision you'll be making, your first major decision in your lives, and so you want to give yourself space to really do your research and figure out what's going to be the best fit for you.
And I'll kind of end with this. Man, you can do anything. To the students out there, it's nothing you can't do. I promise you. You are what you say you are. The power is in your tongue on what you want to do in life. So whether you're at an HBCU, and most of us has chosen HBCUs because of different reasons. For me, it was a football scholarship. Okay, that led me there. But I just want to let y'all know, just like that college teacher told me I wasn't college material. Well, she didn't know the God I serve. I think you can do anything that you put your mind to. So I just want to encourage the kids that are listening, the ones that take your time, make a decision, make a good decision that, like they said, is going to benefit you in the future. You have to go to your counselor. You got to ask these questions. Some of y'all don't have moms and dads that are in y'all life and that are just doing stuff for y'all, or able to go talk to the counselor. You have to take responsibility for your own life, period. So whatever school you choose, I hope you choose a HBCU, but whatever one you choose, I would just ask that you take your time, number one, and take responsibility for your own life.
Jamon, would you like to add anything?
I mean, everything has been said. I would say, if students have the opportunity, I think it's always important to visit these campuses if you can. It's, you may not have necessarily the resources, or maybe you live in California, but I know for me, I ended up at Tuskegee because I did step foot on the campus. And I would say that's true for any school that you may be interested in. But if you're unable to visit the campus, a lot of schools have, the virtual options now. I think it's important to talk to current students, talk to alums, like really, again, as so many people have eloquently stated, to really do your research, because again, it is a choice that could impact the rest of your life, but I think it's important to really make sure you do that research. And always, Tuskegee, just throw that out there. All right, y'all, I'm done.
Before they start a fight, I will just close us on out. On behalf of Accept, I am so grateful for our panelists this evening. This was an amazing conversation. It was real, it was raw, but also incredibly affirming to our students and professionals who are on the call. And if you check out the chat, you can see some of those comments. Everyone who is still here with us, thank you for hanging in an extra few minutes. We do have a few more Tuesdays to go. We have sorority and fraternity coming up. And then we have advocacy. How can you be an advocate on your campus? And then our final session in the series will just be an impromptu safe space. And so it's a place for you to just come in and ask any questions you want to ask. We will not broadcast it. It will be a closed session. So 3 more sessions coming up, all of them on Tuesdays at the same time. So we 100% appreciate you attending this evening, spending an hour and a half with a bunch of collegiates. And we're just really honored that you shared time and space with us this evening. So I'll hang out for a few minutes in case anyone has some lingering questions, but It's 8:06 Central Standard Time, so we're 6 minutes over. You are free to head out. Thank you so much. You all have a fantastic evening. And yes, Dr. Wallace, that different world clip. Woo! Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. That's a good one.
It is. It really
All of that, all of that, all of that. I think that's still like one of my favorites.
is. Mm-hmm. It's
Yeah.
amazing. All right. So, and I do want to lift up Daynette again because I believe she's attended every session we've had, and she always offers great insight. So, Ms. Daynette Stewart, thank you so much for your comments this evening and in past webinars, and I'm sure I'll see you next Tuesday as well. All right, friends, I'm checking. I see thank yous, no more questions. Okay. Well, so we're going to call it, friends.
All right.
Again, I'm just really appreciative. Thank y'all so much. And everyone have a fantastic evening. Panelists, you will be hearing from me via email very soon.
Thank you for having us. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Y'all have a great evening.
You too.
Bye.
Mm.